So today we're going to talk about international marketing, and the first thing that we're going to do is we're just going to take a couple of minutes to recap a little bit what we talked about last time, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. Then we're going to go over the first quiz, which is going to really guide our discussion today. And then we're going to look at a video clip about Starbucks. Remember I had mentioned that we were going to look at a short video clip each class to help us to appreciate the application of the key concepts. So today we're going to look at the video clip about Starbucks. All right, so just to recap a few things that we talked about last class. We're just going to try, I'm watching the clock, try and keep it to like 5 minutes. Let me know if I forget anything, but we talked about last time, what is marketing? And we talked about the marketing mix. We said like from 30,000 feet, the marketing mix is somewhat all-encompassing in terms of marketing. We refer to the marketing mix as the 4 Ps: price, place, promotion, and product. And those are the controllable factors. There's many factors that are not within our control. Those factors, importantly, are within our control, and things that we could modify to influence the adoption curve model. Remember we talked about the adoption curve model from chapter 12, the adoption curve model, sometimes referred to as the diffusion of innovation model, visualizes the different segments, the different groups, if you will, of potential customers. And we said there's innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and the non-adopters, which also sometimes is referred to as laggards. But I think the user-friendly term is non-adopters. Remember we looked at this bell-shaped curve, and we said that we have the innovators, so what this model suggests is that everyone in our target market, remember we said the target market is those people that we want to buy our product or service. Everybody is not going to buy or adopt the product all at once. So what this model suggests, and is really very insightful, so regardless of the industry or the category, we need to understand that this is applicable. And importantly, we could influence the model. We could influence the rate at which adoption is going to occur. So we said there's things that we could do. Well, once we sell to the innovators, those are the group of customers who are wanting to be the first to own the product, usually, for example, in a technology category, such as tablet PC, cell phones, etc., flat panel, 1080p, high definition LCD monitors. There's those that are willing to pay a premium to be amongst the first to own the product. And so very often what happens in technology categories is companies implement a skimming pricing strategy, which means they introduce the product at a high price and then in a planned way lower the price over time. And the reason they do that is because what they're trying to do, and what they do very effectively in most cases, is influence the rate of adoption. So in an elastic market, a price-sensitive market, when you lower the price, demand is going to increase by a certain percentage. Now, some markets are more elastic than others. So it doesn't mean that it's going to change in a manner that's directly proportional, but if we lower the price, there's going to be a change in demand in an elastic market. What we need to understand is how elastic. So we need to decide, as business executives, as marketers, whether we lower the price 5%, 10%, 20%. So ideally, what we're expecting is if we lower the price 20%, that sales, the number of units, is going to go up by maybe 50%. In some categories, that's true. So what did we do? We used the marketing mix, one component of the marketing mix, price, to influence the adoption curve model. We could, last time we talked about, we could change the product. We could add features and different benefits, and that could be a reason why people will purchase the product. Or we could expand distribution. Or what else? We could advertise more. Or maybe we weren't advertising before, and now we're advertising. So if we're going to spend more money on advertising or implement promotions, whether they're trade promotions or consumer promotions, that's going to have an impact on this model. So that's why this is so important, is because it gives us a glimpse of what could happen in the future, and then it's up to us to manage and influence this model. And I'm sure you're familiar also with the product lifecycle model, which addresses several key stages of a product's life cycle: introduction, growth, maturity, decline, and in some cases, revitalization. So the reason that's so compelling is because we can manage that. You could take an entire course about managing the product life cycle. There's entire books written on the subject. So it's very important that we understand that if we do nothing, that the product is going to reach maturity and ultimately decline, and then obsolescence, which means sales have reached zero or very close to zero, but there might be a possibility for revitalization. So thinking ahead and knowing that the product will reach maturity, which means sales will be flat, sales are no longer growing, or they're growing at a very slow rate. Because when we talk about growth, when you first introduce a product and you say it's in the growth stage of the product life cycle, that's not like it's growing 3%, 5%. In most categories, especially in technology, we're expecting to see sales growth per year of 50%, or maybe 100%, or 150%. So to say, well, the category is growing 3% per year, that's not growth. I mean, sure, in that category, we're happy to take that 3%. But that's not what we mean by growth. Essentially, if it's growing 3% per year, that's a mature category. And it doesn't mean that that's bad, because we might be a company that has a significant market share. We might have a significant market share, and we could have sales that are in the billions. But the key point is that knowing that the product will reach maturity at some point, what we want to do is continue to stem the growth. So that means we need to proactively manage that process. So the question is, how do we do that? How are we going to get people to continue to buy the product? How do we get more people each year to buy the product? How do we continue to achieve growth year after year after year? And it means that we need to manage the marketing mix. We need to plan for that. That's why it's really, and I can tell you from my business experience, why it is so compelling. And really, if you take away nothing from this class, if you could really internalize the product life cycle, the adoption curve model, segmentation and positioning, if you could really understand that and internalize that, believe me, you've achieved something very significant. Those are some really key concepts in marketing. So while the model, probably by now you've seen it quite a few times, it seems maybe in some ways simple. I mean, E equals MC squared seems simple, but I didn't think of it, and you guys didn't think of it. That's something that Einstein put forth. And so after he put that theory forward, then everybody was like, oh yeah, wow. But don't be deceived by the bell curve and maybe its simplicity, if you will, because it is tremendously insightful. So the burden is on us to manage that product life cycle, to manage this adoption curve. And we're going to talk about a variety of examples this semester. I think in recent times, certainly the way Apple has managed the introduction of the iPad and the iPhone and the iPod are really outstanding examples. And what's intriguing is that they didn't follow an identical strategy for each of those items. But we're going to come back to that. We also talked about 5 key components of marketing. We said, what are 5 key activities? So let's make sure that, that we have those down. All right, you ready? The first one is to identify an unmet need. That's one key major marketing activity. And we said, well, the way that we do that is through research. And we said, well, there's different types of research. There could be primary research and secondary research. Primary research is something that we initiate, and secondary research is research that was conducted by somebody else and something that someone else initiated. Now, mind you, when we talk about primary research, it's something that we initiated even though we may not have conducted the research ourselves. So I don't want you to think that because we used an outside market research firm to conduct the focus groups and we hired a moderator. It's very common for companies to outsource their market research requirements. But if we initiated it and we were involved in the development of the research plan and the research goals, and we paid for it, it's considered to be primary research. Secondary research is very important. What I suggest is we conduct secondary research first, which means do desktop research, get information off of the internet. There's research reports that you could buy online. Some of them, for example, are free as well. For example, at particular trade associations, whether it's for the beverage industry or for the candy industry, very often trade industries and trade associations have state-of-the-industry reports that very often you could get for free. And sometimes, if they're not free, you could get them for $500, $1,500, $2,500, which $2,500, if we were paying out of our own pocket, is a lot of money. But compared to doing primary research, that's a drop in the bucket. Because we said to do 4 focus groups is about $50,000. Fully loaded in terms of costs. So the cost for the facility, the cost to pay the moderator, the cost to have the, for example, discussion guide or the survey instrument written and designed. So spending $2,500 or $5,000 is really a good investment, because that's going to help us develop our primary research. So you don't want to do primary research and just go in there without any background. Even though your team has insight into a particular industry or a particular category, what we want to find out is the unmet need. So I strongly suggest doing secondary research first, getting whatever information you can, because that will inform our primary research. And then we said there's qualitative research and also quantitative research. So primary research can be both qualitative and quantitative, and secondary research can be both qualitative and quantitative. Does that make sense? You see what it is? So we could buy a secondary research report that's either about a focus group, which was a type of qualitative research, or we could buy a research report that is based on a survey. All right, so we talked quite a bit about that. And then the second activity, right? So that's the first activity. The first activity is to identify unmet need. We said we're going to do that through market research. The second activity is to develop a concept. So based on what we find out in the research, we need to develop a concept. We'll talk more about that in another class. The third key activity, go ahead.
Can qualitative research sometimes be quantitative research if there's a large number of focus groups that have been interviewed and spoken to?
Well, there's ways to evaluate information that we get through qualitative research. But remember, typically in a focus group we have 10 to 12 participants, and then if we do 4 focus groups, then we have 4 dozen participants. But that's not certainly something that in most categories or industries or markets that we would consider to be statistically significant, because remember we said if we're going to do quantitative research, if we're going to do a questionnaire, whether it's through the mail or the internet or the phone, we're looking to get approximately 1,500 respondents. So 4 dozen, so we talked to 48 people, and we could get a lot of information that's very insightful, very helpful, very meaningful, that's going to inform our quantitative study. So definitely you want to do qualitative research first before you do quantitative research, because the focus groups, for 4 focus groups is 50,000. For quantitative research, you're talking about spending 150,000. If you want to get 1,500 respondents, you're talking about spending $125,000 to $150,000, approximately. But that's certainly to give you a sense as to the scope, the magnitude. Nope, it's not $5,000. It's over $100,000. All right, so that's based on my experience. So that's something that you should keep in mind.
I mean, you can use one to support the other. You can use a survey to shape how you're going to run your focus groups, or your focus groups to shape how you run your survey.
Well, what I would suggest is to do it the other way, is do your focus groups and let that inform your quantitative research. Because that's where you're going to get the ideas that you want to test. So we've 48 people, we have 10 people that said that they want to have a phone that could take pictures. So say, all right, well, 10 people. We want to sell phones in the United States, 300 million people. How do we know if that's really an unmet need? Maybe it's just these 10 people. Or maybe it's just 20 people. So, but that's something we're going to test in the quantitative research. And if we have a random sample, a representative random sample of our target market, then we'll be able to know with certainly a high degree of accuracy. Of course, there's a margin of error, right? We're going to have to look at the confidence interval, but ideally a 95% confidence interval. We'll be able to know, is it 5% of our target market that wants to have the ability to take photos with their phone, or is it 20%, or could we say 89% said they want to have a wireless phone that has camera capability? See, now that's very compelling. With a focus group, what do I tell people? What are we going to tell them? What are we going to tell the vice president of marketing? Well, 10 people said they want it. 10 people? Now, don't get me wrong, qualitative research is tremendously helpful and very insightful, but it's going to inform, like Jason is suggesting, it's going to inform our quantitative research. So once we get all those ideas, so some are going to say it has camera capability, and some are going to say it's the ability to access the internet, and some are going to say it has the ability to play video, and some are going to say it has the ability to customize ringtones, etc. And then once we find out what all the features and benefits the customer looks for in an ideal phone, then we could test that. Then we could get some quantitative data. And then we'll decide which products we're going to develop and bring to market. So the third marketing activity, now keep in mind, right, we're just from 30,000 feet. We're trying to get an overview about marketing in a global economy. The third activity is then to identify a price the customer is willing to pay.
You said that was the fourth thing last time?
No, fourth is gain distribution.
Yeah, so after we develop the concept, we're going to test that, and so we're going to do multiple rounds of qualitative research, multiple rounds of focus groups, because first we're going to just have a brainstorming session. We're just going to solicit input from our target market and ask them about, and often we ask the questions trying to get at the same information, but we'll ask the question several different ways, because what we're trying to do is have the moderator engage everybody that's in the focus group. So we'll ask the question, for example, what do you like about your wireless phone? What don't you like about your wireless phone? What are the features that you would like to see in the wireless phone that you use? If you were going to develop your own wireless phone, what are the features and benefits that you would like to have? So we keep trying to probe and push, and that's the role of the moderator. It's challenging to do. It's not that easy to facilitate a focus group, because we need to get everybody to contribute. And sometimes what happens is you have somebody in the group that's very domineering and very outspoken. And once they speak and they say, no, I don't think a camera is important, then everybody else shuts down. But no, I need to hear what Stepansky thinks. I need to hear what Harvey thinks. I need to hear what Daniel thinks. I need to know what Evan thinks. So we got to keep coming at the questions in a variety of different ways, but ultimately what we're trying to do is identify that unmet need. So after we do that, then we're going to develop the concept. And what we're going to do is we're going to develop a concept board, which is basically a board that has an illustration of the product with a concept statement, which might say something like, now, for the first time, a phone that has camera capability so that you could take high-resolution photos and share them with your friends and family. And we're going to go in with a dozen different concepts. Usually it's hard to test more than that. You might think, let's test 30. But be realistic, it's going to be hard to capture input on that many concepts. But now we've done 4. We've done the discussion, the concept boards. So we take those, that's 4 more. And then based on what input we get about the concept boards, then we're going to develop models and prototypes. And we're going to take those into focus group research. And models and prototypes, they could be very expensive. So you don't want to spend money and time developing prototypes if we don't have a reason to believe that the target market is interested in that product, or a product with those features and benefits. So we want to have something that at some point, even if it's just a model, that the target market could touch and feel. So by that time, we've already done 12 rounds of focus groups. So now we spent, what, $150,000. So it gets expensive pretty quick. And the reason why we do that many focus groups is because each time we approach a go, no-go decision point. So based on what we learn out of the research, we're either going to drop some concepts off our list, and others are going to go forward to the next step. So that's why it's important to continue to gather information to determine which are going to go forward and which are not going to go forward. So we're also, as part of the testing of the concepts, we're going to try and determine the price, right? As we finalize the concepts, we're going to determine a price that the target market is willing to pay. Then what we're going to do is, in step 4, is yes, gain distribution, which means our product should be on the shelf before we go to step 5, which is to build awareness, which basically means advertising and promotions, publicity. And importantly, we said we need to get distribution first before we build awareness. Why? Why is that so important? And I'll tell you, I've seen executives make this mistake, and it's a big mistake. It's a big mistake to do that. Go ahead, tell us.
Because when people show up to the store, they want the product to be there. If they don't see it there, it's going to be an issue.
Right, so we spend millions of dollars on advertising, and it could be print advertising, it could be advertising, commercials on television, it could be outdoor advertising, it could be advertising on the radio, so broadcast. Right? Broadcast includes radio and TV. But people are starting to classify radio as a form of outdoor advertising. It's become more of a more and more common. So those are 5 key marketing activities. So what I just shared with you is like an overview of the entire course. So that's an overview of global marketing. And we're going to see how that's going to vary from market to market and how that's going to differ in France, from Italy, from the United States, Israel, Iraq. So it is an overview. We're going to come back and fill in some of the specifics and some of the details. But we're all good? 5 key marketing activities. Everybody got that in their notes? Identify the unmet need, develop a concept, determine the price, get distribution, and then build awareness. Are we good?
Yes, Coach.
Are we great?
Always.
Yes, yes we can.
I seem to recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, from my last course, we learned that there are certain models that they work a little bit backwards, where they'll build awareness before gaining distribution, because what they'll do is they'll advertise, and then the customers will go to the retailers go to the wholesalers, and the wholesalers go to the mother company.
So what is that called? Who knows the difference between push versus pull? Right? That's what you're describing there. The difference, right, between Lautman.
Want to know push and pull?
Is there something else you wanted to share with us?
No. Were you asking that, or is that a rhetorical?
Yeah. What? You want to share or no? No pressure.
Push is you advertise to the manufacturers to put the stuff on the shelves to push them to the consumers.
That's it?
No, you look at me like
No, I'm listening. I'm listening to what you're saying. Go ahead.
And Piango said he wants to do the pull strategy.
Sure.
Yeah, wait, yes. I don't know. He has this kind of like really blank look on his face. He's like, what just happened?
No, in the pull strategy, try to pull your consumers in.
What do you guys think?
Yeah,
Push it. You gotta push it.
pushes from like big companies, like a push strategy would be something like Campbell Soup to push it into the store, and a pull strategy would be from Key Foods to pull people into their store.
I think pull would be to generate awareness to get the consumers to ask the retailers about the product.
Go ahead. You're on the right tracks.
And then the retailers would ask the manufacturers or the broker in between about the product, and they would pull it from the manufacturer, who would eventually start to create and mass produce it.
You see? You guys got that?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, pull is when when you advertise, the point is to get the consumer to ask the retailer about the product, and if they get enough people asking about the product, they ask the manufacturer to start creating and producing them.
Or to ship it. It might be a product that already existed, but to your point, if you advertise beforehand, so maybe you've had trouble pushing the product, right? So push means we try to get distribution and push it onto the shelves, right? To get the retailers to carry it. But if they don't, what you want to happen is what you described, Moshe, right?
Noah.
Noah. Oh, I was close. Is to get the customer to come into the store and say, do you have that new detergent? They're like, no, we don't have it. Well, if 100 people go in there, they're going to be like, well, what's going on here? Right? So what we're doing is we're creating demand for the product.
So what would be an example of like a case where you have to use the pull method?
Six drugs, maybe.
So yeah, excellent. Like pharmaceuticals. This is actually a very innovative approach, and it's been become more popular in the last 5 years or so. So for example, you'll see a commercial that advertises for an allergy medication.
Ask your doctor about that.
Exactly. And then it says, well, if you have these symptoms and need some relief, ask your doctor to write a prescription. So then what happens? All these people that have allergies, they go to their doctor and they say, I want to take this medication. And the doctor says, well, you're not a doctor. They say, I know, but these are the symptoms that I have, and this product is going to relieve the symptoms. So that's a good example, certainly, of a pull strategy. So who are they advertising to? They're not advertising to pharmacies, in this case. They're advertising to the end user. And then the end user is going to request the product. Right? That's a really good example of a pull strategy. Now, we could advertise to doctors, right, and get doctors. That's a different approach. And it's not that we can't do both. We could. Very often companies do pull and push strategy. So you can advertise to the end user, but you're also going to advertise to the doctors and build awareness with them and say, are your patients suffering from allergies? Now, for the first time ever, a time-released allergy medication that's safe and, well, we would want to say inexpensive, but not in that category. Medication is very expensive. So that's a really good example. Pharmaceuticals is a good example of where we see push and pull being used by a company.
So is push doesn't require as much advertising?
Push doesn't.
Well,
Like what would be, can you, I've been in marketing courses, I'm a marketing major, but like I've always had an issue with like understanding, Noah actually explained the pull strategy really well. Just go out. But what about the push strategy?
you're the man, Noah, not to be confused with Moshe. Get your Bible stories right, all right? So, push is focusing on a different individual in the buying process.
Your target
So,
audience.
well, your target audience is different. So the target audience in one case is the doctor, and the target audience in the other case is the end user. But when you think about the purchase process, we have what? Influencers. What else? What do we have? Anybody remember this? Go ahead.
We have reference groups that you would use to help you make decisions. Maybe,
Right, so absolutely. So you have your reference group, you have your influencers, you have your purchasers, your users, which are not always the same. So sometimes the end user is not the purchaser. So maybe, for example, it's a product that's used by, let's say, a man, and it could be purchased by his wife.
children's toys.
Children's toys, absolutely, is an excellent example. We advertise, think about when we advertise, let's say, children's cereal. When we advertise children's cereal, we advertise to children and we advertise to parents, but the messaging is different. So when we advertise to kids on the Cartoon Network for our cereal, what do we emphasize? That it's cool, that it's fun, Barney, Smurfs, right? I love you, you love me, and all of that. And then what is the Smurf song?
Can't say
La 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 la. Right. Sing a happy song. La 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 la. Smurf the whole day long. So that's what you're gonna emphasize with kids. But to parents,
Or nutritional value.
absolutely, we're gonna focus on why should you buy this cereal? Because it's nutritional. It's high in vitamin C, high in vitamin A. Gives your child energy, keeps them healthy. You see, so the messaging is different. So we have to keep that in mind in terms of the decision-making process. That we have those that are the influencers, those that are the deciders, those that are the purchasers, those that are the users. So does that make sense in terms of when we talked about push versus pull? So there's a lot of money that's spent on trade advertising. So you advertise, for example, in terms of pharmaceuticals, you advertise in magazines that are read by doctors. So you have a full-page ad that's building awareness and interest on the part of doctors about how this medication solves a particular problem for our patient. And that's not like less expensive per se than advertising to the end user. You could still spend very easily millions of dollars to advertise to, let's say in this case, to reach doctors through medical journals and medical magazines. Maybe you might, if we do some research, you find out that a lot of doctors play golf. You might advertise in Golf Digest. See, one of the key concepts in advertising has to do with reach. So the question is, how do we reach those people that have allergies? How do we reach doctors with a particular specialty, whether they're cardiologists or they're allergists? Questions?
Yeah, just to clarify, would we have our 5 key components of marketing? Then does the pull strategy, is that an exception, or is that how does it work with because we ordered the last 2 gain distribution and then
It depends on the
Right.
category.
Okay.
Yeah, depends on the category, the product, the
You
market.
say one is more popular than the other? Pull versus push?
I wouldn't say that. It would be hard to generalize that. But what I would say is, depending on the category, in some categories it could be definitely more common to use a pull strategy versus a push strategy. Noah!
So you'd say that they're pretty much just different methods in terms of the way that they want people to buy their product. But does it ever happen where they try the push strategy and it doesn't work, and then they try the pull strategy?
It could be, but realize that in the case of pharmaceuticals, the patient is the influencer, and the doctor is the decision maker. You guys follow? When we talk about this decision-making process,
So first the doctor would have to give the okay.
yes, we have the influencer, the decision maker, so we need to understand this. In this case, the patient is the influencer. So what medication are we going to use? Who's influencing that decision? The patient, because the patient goes to the doctor and says, I want to take this. But you have to get a prescription. It's not Pepto-Bismol. Pepto-Bismol you could go and buy yourself. For prescription medication, and this is an excellent example, the decision maker is the doctor. Everybody see this? So the patient is the influencer, the doctor is the decision maker, and then these could also be different. So let's say this is the husband. But the wife might be the purchaser, and the husband is the user. So the reason why this is significant, and we have to understand this on a category by category basis, is because, again, the messaging, right, these are each, in some cases, representative of a different target audience. So in this case, the messaging to the doctor is going to be different than the messaging to the patient. And the same with the kid's cereal. The messaging, the kid is the influencer. How does the kid influence the parent? Well, when you're pushing the child in the shopping cart and they see the Smurf cereal, what happens? Wah! 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 And then they're influencing. Want me to do that again?
Nope.
That's, you're good? You're good? Stepansky, you sure?
Yeah.
One more time?
Nope.
No, that's
ears
good.
are ringing. It's okay.
Right? So, your ears are still ringing?
You got it.
So, that's how the child is influencing the parent. Then the parent has got to decide what cereal to buy, whether or not they're going to buy the cereal that the child wants. And then the parent is going to purchase it, and then the child is going to use it. So this is very important to understand and evaluate each category, each product that we're operating in, so that we could decide how we're going to reach these different target audiences. And in different markets around the world, it's going to vary. That's why research is so important. And in part 6 of our book, it talks about doing a country analysis, which is so critical. Last semester we talked about a lot about the impact that culture has. But it's not just culture. Certainly culture can have a very significant impact on our marketing strategy. But it's not just culture. There's other aspects that are going to inform our decision as well. Go ahead, Daniel.
When it comes to the model that we were talking about with specifically with drugs, isn't that not always the case just because of like the issue of generics? That a lot of time a patient may come in and say, oh, I want Lipitor, but instead of getting Lipitor, they get the generic version of Lipitor. So.
Well, the manufacturer of Lipitor, which is Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, part of their campaign might be insist on the original. Insist upon authentic Lipitor. Accept no substitutes.
Don't be fooled by
Well,
those.
the thing is
Yeah.
that doctors never, like doctors most of the time, they're under plans, like in terms of the insurance companies that insist that they have to prescribe generics.
Well, remember the prescription is going to be filled by a pharmacist. So whoever, whatever brand, whether it's a branded product or generic, that's up to the doctor to decide. Now, whether somebody's insurance company is going to pay for the brand or the generic is a different issue. Most drug plans will pay less for a prescription if you insist on the brand and a generic is available. But I would be really concerned if the drug companies, well, not the drug companies, but the insurance companies were dictating to doctors which medication to prescribe. I mean, granted, we talked about push versus pull and the influencers, but if the insurance companies can tell you, no, only write for this, only write for that, write for the brand, not generic, I mean, that's kind of alarming. Then what do you need the doctor for? The doctor has got to decide. So you want to write for 10 milligram, the insurance company says, no, you know, write for 20 milligrams.
Wouldn't it be, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it most of the time that the brands that we'll find doing this type of thing are new medications that were not before, so they wouldn't necessarily have generics now, or is it, would it be for all types of brands that are coming out?
I think it could happen at any point in that product life cycle, that especially when the patent is close to expiring, that it might become more critical to get the patient to insist on having the branded version of the product. So after the 20-year patent is close to expiring, I think that's the point when you might really want to, you know, increase your expenditure to try and get people to insist upon getting the branded version. And we're going to talk about different advertising strategies later in the semester. Pulsing versus flighting. Does that ring a bell to anybody? We're going to talk about how that could be more effective and less effective depending on the situation. All right, so let's move now to quiz 1. All right? So let's see. Here we go. Ready or not? Here's the first question. In a broad sense, the uncontrollable elements of the foreign business environment constitute the culture. So, true or false?
False.
Check page 15. The answer is true. So in a broad sense, the uncontrollable elements constitute the culture. The difficulty facing the marketer in adjusting to the culture lies in recognizing its impact. So that's on page 15. You guys see that?
Well, if it includes in that circle where it says like infrastructure and geography and all of these different things of being uncontrollable elements, then the culture only constitutes a very small part of everything else. That's a much bigger part of uncontrollable elements.
You might interpret it that way.
I mean, I know that's how I interpret it.
Yes.
Yes, apparently that's the way that you interpreted it.
Yeah.
All right, but we'll talk more about that next time. All right, question 2. Which of the following is not true? That's the same thing as false, right? Of the impact of globalization on domestic markets. So this is on page 8 through 10. Which of the following is false with regard to the impact of globalization on domestic markets? The answer is the best answer. Go ahead. Cats.
Companies.
No? Who? Where? I hear somebody talking. Who is it? You?
I thought so.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm hearing things.
Well, I'm hearing things too, but go ahead.
Companies with only domestic markets have found it relatively easy to sustain their customary rates of growth.
Right. So the answer is E. Companies with only domestic markets have found it relatively easy to sustain their customary rates of growth. Do you guys agree? So that's false, right? So what Jason just shared with us is actually false, because the reality is that companies with only domestic markets are actually finding it difficult to sustain their customary rates of growth, and that's the reason why they're trying to expand globally. Everybody see that? So once you reach maturity in a particular market, once you have a high level of household penetration, one of the growth strategies is market development. So 4 different growth strategies. You ready? Market penetration, market development, diversification, and new product development. Got it? Market penetration, market development, diversification, and new product development. So what are we talking about here? Is market development, which means increase the sale of existing products in new markets. That's what we're addressing here. So once you've reached maturity and have a high level of household penetration, then how are we going to grow? So market penetration apparently hasn't solved our problem, which is market penetration has increased the sale of existing products in the existing market. So we've done that, and we've reached a certain point where now sales have flattened out. So what do we do next? Well, that's what we're going to talk about the entire semester, which is deploy a market development strategy, which is to try to sell our product in other markets. So E is false. All right, 3. Who's going to read 3? Go ahead, Daniel.
Which of the following is a controllable element for an international marketer? So in that case, it's distribution.
Right, so one of the controllable elements for an international marketer is C. On page 11, channels of distribution is one of the 4 Ps. We don't see price here. We don't see promotion. We don't see product. We only see place. Everybody see the connection? Remember we talked about the marketing mix? We said it's the controllable factors, the controllable elements. So the one that's mentioned here is channels of distribution, which refers to place. So the answer is C. 4. Stepansky. 4.
Yes. Which of the following is an uncontrollable element for an international marketer? What did I say about the pants? Yeah, right. So it's distribution also.
Right. So the best answer here is structure of distribution. That's an uncontrollable element. That's discussed on page 11. So here we see promotion, price. Those are components of the marketing mix. Those are controllable. All right, number 5. Who's going to read number 5?
I'll do it.
Go ahead, Julian.
With respect to the environment in which a business operates, such factors as competition, legal restraints, government controls, and the weather would all be examples of what are called uncontrollable elements.
What do you guys think?
No.
The best answer is? Which, go ahead, Josh, tell us.
I thought maybe it might be predictable.
Yes, the best answer is C. Predictable elements.
As weather or predictable elements?
Well,
I guess it
forecast.
Yeah, well, they're not always right, but they like to think that
Look
they
outside.
can predict the weather. So the best answer there for 5 is C. Next question. Go ahead. All right. Number 6. Who's going to read it? Go ahead. Tell me your name.
Ezra.
Ezra, go ahead.
Robert Jonas is in charge of a new marketing effort directed toward Peru. In order for his company to effectively market and distribute to all of Peru's major cities, Mr. Jonas must devise a logistics plan for crossing the Andes Mountain on a daily basis. Which of the following foreign environment uncontrollable variables would be a chief concern as Mr. Jonas devises his plan? Geography and infrastructure.
Right, so the best answer is C. So which of the following foreign environment uncontrollable variables would be of a chief concern? It's geography and infrastructure. In this particular case.
A lot of C's.
Correct. That's also discussed on page 11. So based on that scenario, for this particular business in Peru, who's trying to determine how they're going to market and distribute their product, in this case, the geography and infrastructure would be one of the uncontrollable variables that we need to take into consideration. All right, number 7. Go ahead. Tell me your name.
Danny,
All right, Danny, go ahead.
the primary obstacles to success in international marketing are a person's self-reference criterion and an associated ethnocentrism.
Right, absolutely. So the best answer is C. That's discussed on page 16. So the primary obstacles to success in international marketing are a person's self-reference criterion, right? That's what Daniel was referring to before, and an associated ethnocentrism. So who could tell us what that is when we talk about self-reference criterion? Isn't that about when we evaluate maybe a new product or an ad that we see or a commercial we see based on our culture, our religion, our preference, our values? So we need to understand that. We need to understand who's going to see our commercial and what are they going to think about it. You want anything to that, Daniel? No? We're good? Questions about that? All right, let's go on to the next one. Number 8. Who's up at bat? Going once. Going twice. Evan. Number 8.
The United States, unrelated individuals keep a certain physical distance between themselves and others when talking or in groups. You do not consciously think about that distance, you just know what feels right without thinking. Someone from another culture would not necessarily understand this and apply their own rules for context when speaking. The preceding is an illustration of what is called applying a D.
So the best answer is self-reference criterion. E. When reviewing the mentioned social custom of contact. We need to understand that. When we're doing business outside of our domestic market, we have to understand that something as commonplace as how far or how close you stand to somebody is important. Now, do you ever notice that? Like sometimes, usually, it's very common. It's part of American culture that you're a fair distance from somebody when you're talking to them. Is that true? Do you guys agree? In other markets, and we have a very diverse group here, so in other markets, like for example, in Latin America, it's very common that somebody will be standing very close to you, might have their hand on your shoulder. You know, they don't mean anything. They don't mean to, they don't mean to be inappropriate or to invade your personal space, but it's a difference in culture. So we need to understand that. And sometimes you'll see that. You'll feel, maybe you'll be talking to somebody and they'll be standing like right next to you, like your nose is like 1 inch from their nose. And you might feel like a little uncomfortable. But that's because of the culture.
How was your day?
Our self-reference criterion. So it's important to understand that and appreciate that. Do you guys agree? Have you encountered that in being in other markets as part of traveling? Have you experienced differences in culture that were unique compared to your culture?
In this neighborhood alone. I mean, it's not, you don't have to travel abroad. I mean, clash
The
of
heights,
culture here.
your neighbors.
Yeah, there's definitely differences in culture.
It can even be a culture within your own culture.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So next question, number 9. Go ahead. Harvey, number 9.
Your blank can prevent you from being aware that there are cultural differences or from recognizing the importance of those differences. So based on what we just said, I think it's self-reference criterion.
Right, absolutely. So is self-reference criterion an important concept in global marketing?
You just got it.
Yes.
Very important.
It's very important.
Three questions important.
So we're gonna form an opinion or have a reaction that's gonna be based on our values, our culture, and we need to be careful not to judge others. And it's important when we're in a managerial position to not develop an ethnocentric mentality. So remember we talked about this idea of one size fits all, right? We can't think about or make decisions with this ethnocentric mentality, which is that as a manager we think, well, that's the way we sell it in our domestic market, or those are the features or benefits that the product has in our domestic market, so we're going to try and sell it that way everywhere around the world. Generally, that's a huge mistake. We need to customize the product to the local market. So what is the rally cry for global marketers? Think global, but act local. So think global, which means it's great. You want to sell your product everywhere around the world. Then we need to do a country analysis, country by country, to make sure that our product is relevant and that we're going to customize it to meet the needs of the local market. And that means that we're going to have to customize the price, we're going to have to customize the product design, we're going to have to customize the advertising, and we're going to have to adapt to the channels of distribution. You know, for example, in the US, it's very common that products are distributed in what we call hypermarkets, which are these huge retailers like Walmart. A typical Walmart store is 200,000 square feet, which is huge. But that's in the United States. In other markets, you know how products are distributed? For example, on little push carts. That's where you have to get distribution. Now that's different from saying we got distribution in Walmart and they're going to carry it in 2,500 locations. That's very different from saying, oh, wait a minute, our distribution channel is all these push carts all around a particular city. That creates certain challenges. And if we're new to the market, we're going to have to find a way to deal with that. So maybe we are going to have a joint venture with a company, right? Julian might already have a business in Vietnam.
Really?
And is distributing his product. Let's say he's selling shampoo, and you're probably thinking, what does Coach know about shampoo, right? But actually, I know something about shampoo, but this is the thing. How do we modify the product? Well, in the United States, it's very common to sell shampoo in these 16-ounce, right? These very big bottles of shampoo for $8.99. But in Vietnam, for example, we're going to have to sell it in these little single-use packets for not $8.99 or $9.99, but for maybe 99 or even 25 cents. Because why? Because the level of disposable income in that particular market is substantially less than in the United States. So does that make sense? So here's an example where you have to modify the product. So how it's sold. So instead of selling it in these big bottles, we're going to sell it in these little packets. You guys know what I'm talking about? You've seen like these little packets sometimes in the corner store.
You actually do that?
They have like little packets of like aspirin or Tylenol. And sometimes they even have, you'll see like trial size, right? So what we consider in the United States, trial size products or little travel size, that's what in some markets, that's what they purchase. They don't see that as trial size. That's the size that they could afford to buy. Does that make sense? So we modified the product, the packaging, and also we modified the price. And then we have, in this one example, also the issue of distribution. We're not getting distribution at Walmart. We have to get distribution at all these little push carts. Fortunately, Julian is already selling shampoo there. Now, what do we want to do? Is sell conditioner for hair. Conditioner for hair. So what are we going to do? We're going to have a joint venture with Julian since he has access to the channels of distribution. So this is a big deal to have to solve this problem. It's not so easy to say, oh, we're going to sell it there. Great, well, who's going to carry your product? And how long is it going to take you to develop these relationships and partnerships with the distribution channel? But Julian's the man. So I think that's a good example. Let's take the last question. Number 10. Who's going to do it?
Step up.
Go ahead. 10, here we go.
Which of the following organizations seem better equipped for internationalization? B, firm that has production capacity that upgrades on market demand.
Yes, so the best answer is B. That's on page 19. All right, great job. You guys rock.
Have a good weekend.
Woo!
Look at this one.